They're no longer writing the pieces they're supposed to be publishing because of the climate in this country.
Yeah, there's so much repression happening from universities, and like obviously a lot of it's coming from the State Department, right? But the university administrators themselves have been the leaders of this repression campaign. Just it's, you know, a big part of it is the deportations, right? That is a meaningful thing that gets a lot of people scared of protesting. But it comes on like a hyper local level when administrators arrest people, mass arrest people at walkouts, at protests, that, you know, for things that are really like not, you wouldn't arrest people otherwise for. Banning organizations like SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, that are organizing demonstrations, and shedding light on, again, like genocide that we are seeing unfolding in Gaza that we all know is happening. Like we all can tell what is happening. We all can tell. It is getting harder and harder by the day to try to argue that there is not a genocide happening in Gaza, right? But people can see the repression, the extreme repression that surrounds, you know, talking about Gaza and talking about Palestine, and it dissuades them from getting involved. Now, we are learning new information thanks to these lawsuits. We are starting to hear directly from officials of the State Department how the cases of international students who are pro-Palestine are being handled. How are they deciding who to target and what's going on with that? So let's see if I have a video, or yeah, let's go with this.
A controversial website is at the center of a federal trial here in Boston after revelations that Immigration and Customs Enforcement has used it to target certain activist students and professors for deportation, one of which being Tufts University student Rumeysa Ozturk, whose arrest made national headlines earlier this year.
The site is Canary Mission. It collects and publishes profiles of people the site claims have shared anti-Israel and anti-Semitic viewpoints.
It partakes in the false conflation of criticism, any criticism of the state of Israel, which is a political entity, with anti-Semitism.
Rachel Weber is a Jewish lawyer and a professor at UMass Amherst.
Wow, is this local? This is what local coverage is on? This is kind of impressive, man. I never thought I would hear media be trying to make the distinction between, you know, anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, and anti-Semitism. I'm generally pro-Israel. That said, I want to live in a place where there is difference of opinion and the freedom to pursue endeavors without the fear of political reprisal. Isn't that democracy? ? I like democracy. I mean, this is the thing. I think, you know, there is an extent to which Palestine is becoming the everything issue, right? Like when you start repressing this hard pro-Palestinian activists, it goes from beyond, you know, an anti-Israel, quote unquote, pro-Palestinian, quote unquote issue, when it's really an issue of Palestinian human rights. It goes beyond that, and it goes to being anti-war, anti-weapons manufacturing, anti-repression of freedom of speech, anti, you know, this kind of shit, anti-doxing. And so Canary Mission, the website that they're talking about, has been around for a long time, like at least a few decades. And it's always been like, it's kind of been like a locus of fear within like the pro-Palestinian protest community. Like I've known about Canary Mission like long before October 7th happened. And what they do is they collect profiles on like students, faculty who have been involved in protests. You can search for a student, see like this, and like literally just like students who you've never heard about before. And I'm not going to put these students on blast by like going through, but like they have tabs, students, protesters, professionals, and they basically will document, like go through all of your fucking social media, all of your, anything you've ever said that's been on recording, and try to couch it and pose it in as if it's like the most anti-Semitic thing you've ever heard. And usually it's just like people saying, oh, Israel bad, and I'm not in favor of Israel going and striking, occupying Lebanon, or, you know, attacking Palestinians in the West Bank or whatever. I love that, like, it's so fucking, like, this shit is so fucking Islamophobic. But this used to be like you know, people that I know would be terrified of ending up on Canary Mission. Their lives would be totally fucking destroyed because employers sometimes would either look at this list or receive this list directly from Canary Mission. And it's basically like a do not hire this person, like a mark of death. And I was talking to, like, early on when Israel's military campaign in Gaza was first happening, I was talking to one of my professors. And he told me the story about a Palestinian man. And my professor's Jewish, right? And he's on Canary Mission. He has a profile there. And he's had it for a few years just because he posts on Twitter about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he's obviously against Israel's, like, settler colonial practices. But he talked about the difference between him being on Canary Mission and still retaining his job and still having some, you know, authority and tenure because he's a Jewish professor, right? Like, it's kind of hard to paint somebody as anti-Semitic when they are literally Jewish, versus a Palestinian friend of his who he knew, who used to be, you know, professor and had a job, ended up on Canary Mission and was not able to get hired anywhere after that. He had to work as a bus driver for years. So the application of this blacklist, this doxing website, which anybody can submit to anonymously, and they never will have to face any repercussions for it, it has a racialized impact. Like, if you are Muslim, if you are brown, and you can go through yourself if you really want and go through the list of students and professors, a lot of them are brown, black, Muslim people, and they're the people who are most likely to end up being repressed and silenced because of blacklists like this. Now, what's new is that now the US government is relying on these blacklists to decide who to deport from this country. And we don't know if they're getting, you know, these lists sent directly to the government or if the government themselves is using this. At least I don't know. We're going to find out about that. So let's start with, as the Trump administration identified pro-Palestinian academics to target for deportation, it relied heavily on an anonymously run pro-Israel website that has been criticized for doxing, according to newly unsealed court documents and testimony at an ongoing trial. The Department of Homeland Security assembled a tiger team of intelligence analysts who built dossiers on about 100 foreign students and scholars engaged in pro-Palestinian activity. More than 75 of those people were identified by the shadowy website Canary Mission. Testifying at the trial Wednesday, Homeland Security official Peter Hatch acknowledged the site's significance to the Trump administration effort, but said any information taken from the site was independently verified. So, oh my God, the acting chief of the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs, John Armstrong, testified that he'd had at least a dozen conversations with White House officials about the student deportation drive, and that Stephen Miller, top Trump aide, was on interagency conference calls related to the issue at one point at least weekly. Bro, Miller, and by the way, 100% white supremacist, like confirmed white supremacist in the administration. You know, the biggest supporter of deporting everybody possible. Trump literally has joked that Miller is so pro-deportation that, you know, he could see somebody who's been in this country for 20 plus years, is an amazing husband, has been, like, you know, doing great work at his job, has been working here for 20 years, and Miller will still say, deport them, get the fuck out of this country. So, yeah, so these doxing websites have existed for a long time, and they used to be kind of the reason that people were scared about getting involved in protests or speaking out. Even as early as, like, I remember at Cornell in 2023, like late 2023, in the immediate aftermath of Israel beginning its campaign in Gaza, doxing and Canary Mission were, like, they were big things that we were discussing as a community, like major topics. You know, there were brave Palestinian students who I knew who were saying, like, don't be scared of it. It's like, I've been on Canary Mission, you know, it's got no motion anymore. And I think it's true that these sites have gotten a lot less motion in recent years because it's become clearer as more people learn about the Palestine issue, how biased and one-sided they are, and how, like, obviously, you know, McCarthyist their approach is. But, you know, being anti-doxing, like having an anti-doxing policy on the university administrative level, is something that we as a community agitated for. So I'll pull up like Cornell anti-doxing. They put together a committee, Cornell, after like we had agitated for it, like protested for it, released this policy. A Cornell student, faculty member, postdoctoral trainee, or staff member will violate this policy if they knowingly make restricted personal information about a Cornell student, faculty member, or staff member publicly available with the intent to threaten, intimidate, or incite the commission of a crime against the individual, or with the intent or knowledge that the restricted personal information could be used to threaten, intimidate, or facilitate the commission of a crime against the individual. This is interesting. And they created this doxing resource guide. Now, I don't know how committed they are to this really anymore. I doubt that they have... I doubt that anything has happened under this policy since it's happened. Like, we have a new administration that is super, like a Cornell administration that's super right-wing. Many of the names, or even most of the names, came from Canary Mission, but we were getting names and leads from many different websites, said the Assistant Director for Intelligence at Homeland Security Investigations. We received information on the same protesters from multiple sources, but Canary Mission was the most inclusive. The list came in from all different directions. And they had a team going through Canary Mission's list and documenting, okay, let's take a look at these people. Are they international students? Can we verify this shit? And another list that they used came from Beitar US, which also like profiles pro-Palestinian activists on its websites. If you don't know about Beitar, they literally earlier this year posted a tweet filled with a list of students and, you know, at Marco Rubio, deport these guys, please. And the ADL even added Beitar to its list of extremist groups, alleging that the organization openly embraces Islamophobia and harasses Muslims online and in person. But when you can get the ADL to say that, okay, you're really cooked, bro. You're really far gone. Beitar announced on X and in comments to news outlets in January that it had provided a deport list to Trump administration officials. So some of the things that they use to justify revoking visas is saying, just chanting at a rally, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, could be regarded as disqualifying for a U.S. visa because it could be viewed as calling for the destruction of Israel. Armstrong went on to say that a call for institutional divestment from Israel, an arms embargo against Israel, or an end to military aid to Israel could all be problematic. He added that calling the country an apartheid state would probably be considered anti-Israel activity. However, Armstrong said calling for a ceasefire in Gaza would not be held against a visa applicant. So you can beg for, you know, a ceasefire in Gaza, but you can't say, can we take actual action to prevent Israel from violating a ceasefire whenever it wants, which it has been doing for over a year? Can we take action to cut military aid to Israel and prevent it from, you know, slaughtering thousands of Palestinians with barely even an Israeli troop on the ground? So, you know, they're using these doxing websites to identify people for deportation. When asked by a judge overseeing the case and lawyer for the plaintiffs, Hotch said phrases such as Hamas's right, free Palestine, or criticism of the Israeli state could be included in reports against an individual, could be included in their report depending on the circumstances of the individual. So they're basically, now the government is taking from these doxing websites, creating reports on activists, and supposedly strictly factual, but basically reports on, okay, what is their employment, what is their travel, what is their background, you know, what have they said about Israel and Palestine? How are they going to use these reports? We don't know. Except we do know that they've been being used to target people for deportation and removing them from this country. Now, does that mean that they could use these documents to deny people federal employment eventually, deny people rights that they would otherwise have by saying, you know, we have documented that you support terrorism, so you don't have certain rights to a hearing, you don't have certain rights to, you know, hear evidence against you? We don't know. But that's very feasible. That's a very feasible thing, and anybody should be scared of the fact that the government is, you know, creating these reports on activists who are just students. Like, you know, okay, like the faculty as well. These are just professors. Like they're not, you know, politicians. They're not military, you know, people. These are literally just people who have studied, have talked about these issues, and being able to talk about them is important for actually, you know, resolving these conflicts and making progress. And students, I mean, they're fucking students, bro. Like they're kids. They're kids. They've barely even started their lives yet. And having all of this shit documented about them is designed to, you know, push them into, you know, encouraging them to, I don't know, like encouraging them to never have a life, like to never speak out ever again. So yeah, so we have, let's see if we can, if this gives us anything else. Oh my God.
What do you know about
video.
Canary?
Oh, we don't fuck with vertical videos. So people, Canary Mission is a very shadowy organization. It's very unclear who funds it. People can submit, you know, anything they want about other people anonymously. It's a doxing website. Like this is how doxing websites run. They put people on blast with all of their real personal information, but the people who submit that shit get to stay way over here in silence, and you know, you never know who they are. But there has been some investigation of who funds Canary Mission.
By viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We look now at what some are calling the Palestine exception to free speech and academic freedom on college campuses across the United States. Soon we'll hear from a student and professor at Barnard. But we begin with a new report by longtime investigative journalist James Bamford in a series for The Nation on Israel's spying and covert actions in the United States against pro-Palestinian students, supporters, and groups. Its headline, the latest piece, Who is Funding Canary Mission? Inside the doxing operation targeting anti-Zionist students and professors. Last month, Jim Bamford wrote a piece headlined Israel's War on American Student Activists. He's joining us now from Washington, D.C. James Bamford, welcome back to Democracy Now! But how do you know that the Israeli government runs the Canary Mission, and why is it called the Canary Mission?
Well, I don't know why it's called Canary Mission. It has something to do with canaries in the mine or something like that. Yeah, I guess so. The organization that runs it is very, very secret. The two of the organizations that looked into it was the Jewish Forward magazine and the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, and they determined that it was being run secretly from a place in Israel, a very secret place in Israel, and that there was a rabbi behind it. Tracing all these links back is very difficult, but that's where they traced it.
And who are some of the prominent American donors who are involved in funding this effort?
Well, it was very difficult to find that because it's secret who donates money to the organization, largely secret. There was a mistake some group made on a tax form. And what that showed was, at least one of the groups was the Diller family in California. They're one of the wealthiest families in California, billionaires. And they had donated $100,000 to the front organization of Canary Mission. It's a thing called Mega Shalom. It's basically a front organization in Israel. And so what they did was they donated $100,000 through the Jewish Community Federation of San Francisco. And then from there, it went to another organization, the Central Fund for Israel, which is set up in New York, because if they send the money directly to Israel, they don't get a tax advantage. So by sending it through this sort of front organization, the Central Fund for Israel, or Central Fund of Israel in New York, then they get a tax advantage, and then the Central Fund of Israel just forwards the money to Megamat Shalom, the front organization for Canary Mission, and then it goes to Canary Mission. And again, this is very difficult to figure out because there's so many obstacles to trying to find out how the money actually goes from these wealthy individuals and organizations to this group in Israel.
You're saying the Canary Mission should have to sign up as a foreign agent?
Well, yeah, I'm saying that the people who are, first of all, this is a clandestine organization. It's very secretive. It's hidden behind a front company or a front organization in Israel.
The idea that this shouldn't, you know, foreign agent shouldn't, it's like, there's so many groups that should be classified as foreign agents that are doing pro-Israel propaganda and completely like get out of this designation for some reason. Like, you have an American organization called Central Fund for Israel. Is that not classified as a foreign agent? AIPAC, American Israel Political Action Committee, literally exists to further Israel's interests in America, and that's not classified as foreign agent activity. Like, because the thing is, if you can classify it as a foreign agent, then there has to be some documentation, public documentation of their practices within the United States. and they get to take advantage of the fact that they're not registered as foreign agents to hide their activities and hide the networks of funding and like the various organizations that are involved in propping up groups like Canary Mission, groups like Beitar that, you know, seek to harass and intimidate people out of being activists. Okay, so let's read his article that he wrote. So at George Washington, this is the kind of shit that happens with Canary Mission. Canary Mission agents have also been involved in physical intimidation. At George Washington University in 2018, on the eve of a vote on a student government resolution calling on the university to divest from companies profiting from Israeli violations of Palestinian human rights, two powerful men in yellow canary outfits suddenly turned up in the lobby of the building in which the vote was to take place. They then engaged in a strange and frightening dance. Their purpose was to dramatically reinforce Canary Mission flyers that had been posted around campus, advising students to vote against the resolution and attacking the student activists. There are no secrets. We will know your vote and will act accordingly. This has happened on campuses all over this country. Again, I have seen it with my own eyes, witnessed the kind of intimidation that silences people out of voting for divestment resolutions like this, silences students. And so these kinds of lists, they get used by Shin Bet, they get used by the US government, obviously, as we have now learned. So this guy found that the Diller Group, a major Trump backer, donated funding to the Jewish Community Federation of San Francisco. From there, they transferred this money to an Israeli nonprofit called Megamot Shalom. And Megamot Shalom is the front organization that is behind Canary Mission. And once this gets identified, the thing is, like, once this becomes public, the Jewish organizations that, you know, on purpose and inadvertently, it's not for me to say, have contributed to these doxing and harassment websites, once it's revealed, they go, oh, we, you know, condemn this activity. We're cutting all ties with Canary Mission going forward, etc. But when it's so secret, when there's no coverage, when there's no eyes on these websites and what's happening, then they get to continue operating these networks in silence. And so that's why it's really, really important to investigate and to shed light. And I'm really, you know, I commend Jewish Forward, Haaretz, other Jewish journalists who've been doing great work covering these websites and the networks behind them, because it discourages, you know, community organizations, like Jewish community organizations, from being involved. Like, it sheds light on the tactics and breaks up the network, because the only way that this kind of stuff can happen is when it's so secretive, is when there's no eyes on it. And it's when, you know, the US government and the Israeli government have policies in place, like, for example, not registering these organizations as foreign agents, at least the front organizations that, you know, are behind Canary Mission or behind, you know, Israeli advocacy in America. It you know, shuts off eyes, and it allows these networks to continue operating. So shedding light is a big thing, and that is why journalism, I think, is also very important to stopping the genocide that we're seeing in Gaza. The list of Jewish groups that do anti-BDS work on campuses is bafflingly long. Partial tally includes Stand With Us, AEPI, Camera, the David Project, the David Horowitz Freedom Center, Jerusalem U, AIPAC, Maccabee Task Force, and the Zionist Organization of America. So this is how it worked, especially before October 7th. You had a bunch of major groups funded partially by the Israeli government, funded partially by wealthy Americans, hyper-focused on throwing money against Palestinian activists, because the Palestinian student movement is very grassroots. It operates purely through, like, organizations on the ground. You know, there's national SJP, but they're not really in close contact, again, from my experience, not really in close contact with local chapters everywhere. So what they used to do when the Palestine question was more quiet and silent was just throw money. And one of the ways you can use this money is creating these doxing websites and using them to prevent activists from getting employed, from ever having a career, from being able to speak out ever again. So the doxing websites is one strategy, right? There's other strategies, obviously donating to university administrators to get them to do the work of cracking down on pro-Palestinian activists is a tactic that we've seen time and time again to great success. But the thing is, now that everybody knows about what's happening in Palestine, about what's happening in Gaza, when they can't avoid it anymore, when they can see it on TikTok and everywhere, these sorts of money-based tactics don't work as well because, you know, there's so much public support and pressure that you can't put every fucking American on a list at the end of the day, unless you are the US government and you're trying to you're trying to use IRS data to confirm whether someone is a citizen or not, which is something that's happening. But you can't put everybody on a list and call them anti-Semitic, right? Like, it doesn't work like that. So these sorts of things, when there's more numbers, when there's more bodies in these protests, these money-based tactics, anti-protest tactics, anti-activist tactics become harder and harder and harder to continue to rely on. So it's really important to keep showing up to protests, keep putting the pressure, and just don't try not to be too scared of these things, because I promise you they have a lot less relevance now than they used to. They still have motion. They're still a key part of the networks. It's something that I think, you know, still needs to be investigated and looked into further. But the biggest thing you can do is just keep protesting and continue to get involved and protect yourself.